Charlene is very upset too.
Who do we have on the telephone lines?
She should have blew that.
Yeah.
Anyone on the telephone?
Peter.
Oh, it's who unplugged me.
Oh, Trustee Garrow, good.
Yeah.
Trustee Swan?
Yes.
Thank you. And Trustee Cram? Okay.
Trustee Garrow.
Yep, no, thank you. Okay, are we ready? Everyone in the room? Jeremy Armour's looking buffed.
I am. Thank you very much. You noticed, Jeff?
I did
I saw
notice.
you checking me in.
I did. All right, I'd like to
right,
call
let's
the
move on.
regular meeting January the 11th, 2017, and I'd like to call to order. And I'd ask us all to stand to the singing of O Canada. Director, I'll ask you to do roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, trustees. This is our roll call for 11 January 2017. Trustee Arnold.
Present.
First Vice Chair Karkner.
Present.
Trustee Cram. Trustee Garrow.
Present.
Trustee Bill McPherson.
Present.
Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Present.
Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Second Vice Chair McDonald.
Present.
Chair McMillan.
Present.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Grace Mayer.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board approve consent agenda items 3.0, 3.03, January the 11th, 2017, as amended with the deletion of the agenda item 6.01, Rideau Vista Public School Improvement Plan presentation due to the inclement weather. This presentation will be made on January 25th. Do I have a mover? Trustee McAllister, seconded by Trustee Karkner. And I'll ask you to cast your votes, please.
Logged in here.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Garrow, I assume you're in favor?
I'm in favor.
Thank you very much. Okay, are there any conflict of interest declarations? Seeing there are none, I move on to a report from the private session. At its committee of the whole meeting in private session December 14th, 2016, 2 property matters and 1 contractual matter was discussed. 1 recommendation was brought forward to the board. And I need a motion for that. The Upper Canada District School Board approved the motion carried in private session under agenda item D.1, December 14th, 2016. Moved by Trustee McAllister, seconded by Trustee Bill McPherson. I should have cast your votes, please.
I vote in favor. I'm having difficulties getting in.
That's no problem. Trustee Garrow? And Trustee Bill McPherson, I assume you're in favor? Thank you. That carries. Moving on to item 7.01, which is the revised estimate and financial forecast. I'm going to turn this over to our superintendent of business, Nancy Barclay, and Superintendent Phil Dawes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. So as has become our practice, we come to the board periodically throughout the year to give an updated forecast of what we see as a financial situation for the fiscal year that we're in, which is 2016-17. You will recall that June 1st, last spring, the Board of Trustees approved the 2016-17 original budget, which was based on estimates, of course, at that point in time. So now we come with an update to that budget, now that we have some more concrete information, albeit still some estimates incorporated. Most specifically, we have actual October 31st enrollments from this fall and updated projections for the year in terms of enrollment. At the time that the budget was passed in the spring, for compliance purposes, there was a surplus of approximately $900,000, $913,215. You will see here tonight that our updated estimate is now $499,126. I have my colleague Superintendent Dawes as well, who is going to cover the enrollment in more detail than I will, but I'll go through this presentation first. So this is really financial forecast number 1 for this fiscal year. So you will see in this presentation that the planned use of our 16-17 financial resources in support of preparing students for a successful life remains positive. As you've been accustomed to seeing, this is our business cycle. The red box is zeroing our eyes in on where we are in that cycle. So in November, you heard from Carol the 15-16 financial statements, so now we've moved along the continuum, and this is a 2016-17 revised budget. So really, it's a fine-tuning, I would say, reflects updated enrollment, reflects more current salaries based on the actual folks in the positions and where they are residing on the pay grid, updates to benefit rates, along with general fine-tuning of both operating and capital plans by the various departments and, of course, schools as well. It also reflects some new needs, which we will talk about. So this page, and by the way, this presentation is very similar in structure to last year, so you may recall that and be able to follow along. Total pupils of the board and other pupils. So this is showing all of our enrollment. The column called 2016-17 original estimates, that's the enrollment that was developed in April of 2016 and upon which the grants were calculated and the revenues were calculated for the original budget. So that anticipated 26,938.4 average daily enrollment for the year. The next column, the revised estimates, you will see a slight increase overall of 156.8 ADE. That projection is based on data updated by the Planning Department as of November 28th, 2016. So, as I said, Superintendent Dawes will talk more about it, so I shouldn't steal his thunder, but I can say that, you know, it's the bulk of the October 31st enrollment. I know there are still some confirming of those numbers subsequent to that, but enough of the October enrollment to allow planning to project March and to give us a basis for calculating the revenues for the revised estimates. So we're seeing a slight improvement versus what we originally anticipated. So just breaking that out a little further, I'm not going to go through all the numbers on this slide. I'd just like to highlight two key takeaways, in my opinion, that you would see on this slide. Firstly, pupils of the board. So those are the pupils that generate our grants for student needs grants. And you'll notice on the elementary row, we are seeing 168 more students than originally projected. Excuse me, maybe we should have gone intermittently and then we could have a drink between. The second key takeaway I'd like you to notice there is if you look at the secondary under 21 row under pupils of the board, you will see a decline, less than what we had anticipated in terms of our pupils that generate our grants. However, if you look down into the other pupils section, also in the secondary under 21 row, you will see a healthy offset to that decline in the tuition fee paying category. So overall, improvement versus what the original estimates showed. So now we look at the top two rows. We're looking at the revised operating budget. So this view is the income statement or the statement of operations, as the ministry calls it, from a ministry compliance perspective, which is what we tend to focus on. So you will see that both revenue and expenses are projected to be up for the year versus what was originally thought. Revenue up by 3.3 million, expenses up by a bit more, 3.7 million, resulting in a change of approximately $400,000. So I talked at the beginning about the approved budget in the spring was approximately a $900,000 surplus for compliance. Our best estimate now is that it will be about $500,000. So as is usually the case, the change is due to a list of contributing factors, we could call them, both pluses and minuses, some larger than others, but always feel it's prudent to show the bulk of them so that you get a sense of what contributed to the change from the last time you looked at the budget. So I'll start with the enrollment-driven revenue increase of 1.1 million. So of course the largest contributor in the list, and strictly because of the increase in enrollment and the impact of that on the grants. The next line, employee future benefits, updated actuarial forecast. So now that we've completed the 2015-16 year end, at which time we get an updated actuarial valuation on our employee future benefits, in that report, the actuary also provides to us projections of in-year expense for upcoming years based on more recent data. So in this case, the actuary has provided us with a forecast for our in-year expense for employee future benefits that would be approximately $200,000 greater than what we originally expected in the budget. And we have to manage, we have to absorb those in-year expenses, even though we have retirement gratuities or employee future benefits that we're amortizing over time. The next line is net impact of updated expense estimates, and really that is a small number, and it's the net result of multiple department budgets, school budgets, etc., small adjustments that net out to about $100,000 that didn't warrant being pulled out and separately listed in the list. But as we're accountants, we want to make sure that the bottom line comes back to the top line, so we insert that. The next one is the early retirement gratuity funding adjustment. So this is a new item that trustees have not seen before, potentially a one-time item. So employees, and it's not just our board, boards across the province, but employees who upon retirement would be eligible for gratuity based on sick days accumulated. As a result of negotiations, were given the opportunity this past spring to elect to receive their gratuity early and not wait till they retire, but to receive that gratuity at a discounted value. We had 224 employees exercise this option, resulting in a net savings of approximately $800,000. There's a calculation to figure that out. I won't go through the details. But because the ministry previously funded the gratuities by way of the benchmarks over time, the ministry then recoups these savings over the remaining ERSL, estimated average remaining service life, of the employees who were in that group eligible for sick-day-based gratuities. So that means that each year there is about I think it's a little over $100,000 that the ministry then will take back via the GSNs. The next item, network infrastructure security. We will incur an incremental expense of just over $100,000 this year to upgrade, because of necessity, our network infrastructure security. Related third parties, you've heard about this before. Because we're required to consolidate into the Upper Canada District School Board books and financial statements any related parties, two of which are our Upper Canada Learning Centre and our Champions for Kids Foundation. Those two organizations as well, we ask them to update their forecasts, financial forecasts for the year, and then we incorporate that in with the Upper Canada statements or forecast. So between the two of them, not a large adjustment. It's rounded to $100,000 there. I think it's actually about $60,000 change in what their prediction is at this point in time. Another item that has been added is support for our Canada 150 celebrations that are taking place at all of our schools, I believe, throughout the year to celebrate the country's 150th birthday. So an extra $100,000 has been set aside, budgeted, to help support schools with those celebrations. Benefit premiums increase for 2017, specifically January to August 2017, approximately $200,000. We have, we again this past spring, as we had done the spring prior, talked with our benefits consultant to secure an estimate of the benefit rates that we might experience for 2017. The benefit carrier works on a January to December year, unlike ours. So we took into account the estimates or recommendations that were provided to us, and we also went back and looked at some history. Michael went back and looked at some history, and we were careful in what we put into the original budget. So we estimated the rates would go up by more than the consultant said. And in fact, we now have our rates for 2017, and we are looking at an extra $200,000 in expense for January to August. Now, if we move to the provincial benefits trusts that you're aware of before August, we won't need to expend that whole amount. Right now, we're scheduled to go earlier than August, but given the rate at which the waves are happening of groups and boards moving into the trusts, we felt it prudent to forecast at this point that we may have to pay these rates right up until the end of August. So that is why we have included that in the revised estimates. Now we're getting down to the bottom of the list, pupil accommodation review expenses. So again, in the original budget, we had included about $147,000 in that budget for these kinds of expenses. We've increased that amount as a contingency for whatever range of decisions are ultimately made by the board and what costs may come out of those decisions. So examples of those costs are presently meeting and travel costs that are being incurred due to the ARC meetings and working group meetings, etc. Right through to, we've estimated through to what might be expended to implement a full array of decisions. A good example of that being moving costs, even purchasing boxes and moving costs. So at this point, we've put in an extra $200,000 contingency for those kinds of expenses should they materialize. The last two lines, you'll see addition of educational assistance at 2 points in time, October 2016 and this month, January. At budget time, the board had the foresight to leave a surplus, that $900,000, that could be drawn upon during the year should needs emerge that needed to be addressed, including specifically there was discussion about the possibility of needing extra supports for our special needs students. So in fact, there has been that need to staff more educational assistants, $700,000 worth. Now that's for the whole year, from October through to August, in October, and a plan to staff several more in January, which would cost about $300,000. So those are the main changes from the original budget to the revised budget as of today. So a change of $400,000. Moving on to balanced budget determination, which you've seen before. Really, this just shows the in-year surplus projected right now for compliance purposes, $499,126. Gives you a visual below, which will be expanded upon as we bring forecasts to the board in the future. So that's just the beginning. But we are projecting a surplus situation. So everything that's been talked about to date related to, sorry. I think I have my pages out of order. Excuse me for a minute, I just want to go back. Okay, excuse me. The screen is right. So we're still talking about operating then at this point. So this is our accumulated surplus page, which you've seen many times. In this case, if you look at row 3, the one numbered 3, and move across, you see the in-year change projected at this time of a $500,000 change, bringing us to down to an $8.4 million accumulated surplus available for compliance. Much of what you see there, you saw an original budget. You'll see an impact up in the operating accumulated surplus unappropriated. So we're sitting there with a projected $5.4 million by the end of this fiscal year that has not been earmarked for anything in particular. In the bottom half, we continue to see the things that you traditionally see. Employee future benefits has been adjusted now due to the early retirement gratuity payout. And we will be looking at now a $3.9 million amortization of that amount over the remaining ERSL. Excuse me, I neglected to say, compared to original budget, the balance at September 1, 2016, so the first column of numbers, are now updated to reflect our 15-16 closing balances. When we brought the original budget, those were just forecasts at that point. So those are real numbers now. Interest to be accrued, school-generated funds, that's not much change there. Revenues recognized for land, the non-depreciable assets are always recorded here. The change there is an increase of $1.5 million, and that relates to the new Kemptville School and the land for that. Excuse me. What I would draw your attention to is the very bottom right-hand corner. So right now, in terms of the board's equity position, we're forecasting a surplus of $2.5 million, which looks much different than a couple of years ago. Okay, so now going to move on to capital, finish talking about the operating. But because the board approves the capital component as well of the budget, important to take a look at that. The capital expenses really are updated during the year, usually for 3 specific reasons. Departments and schools by this point in time have clearer plans of how they will use their budget allocations, so they're finer in determining what are they going to spend on operating items, what are they going to spend on capital items, or items that have to be capitalized. So that impacts this schedule. As well, with respect to larger capital pots, at this point in time, because we finished last year, in particular facilities knows where they've ended up by the end of August 31st and what funds were unused in that year and now are available to be moved forward to 16-17 for use in this year or future years. And the other contributor that sometimes happens is there may be new in-year allocations that can impact the capital funds available to the board. So in this case, we actually had an increase in school condition improvement. So I'll just go through this fairly quickly. Minor tangible capital assets is really just fine-tuning based on the consolidation of all of the individual budgets and what portion is now planned to be spent on capital items. School renewal, the revised budget you'll see is now $14.8 million versus originally $6.3, and that is driven by both unused funds from 15-16 that I referenced and partially by an in-year allocation increase because of the enrollment impact. Bridgewood Public School, we probably don't need to put Cornwall there anymore because everyone knows where it is. A very slight increase there on what plans to be spent, what is planned to be spent in 16-17 on that project. The new Kempville Elementary School, here's a case where there was a lower remaining amount at the end of last fiscal year, allowing less to be deferred. And therefore you'll see a reduction in what was planned to be spent originally. Still with the project being managed within the total allocation, regardless of in what years the money is spent. Childcare space retrofitting, the plan now is approximately $100,000 spend in 16-17. I understand this relates to Winchester, and there is some more planning to take place with the various stakeholders or partners involved in that project before spending more money. School condition improvement, the increase is mainly due to an additional allocation in year of $12.3 million. So you see a plan there to spend $25 million during this fiscal year. And in other, that mainly was impacted by some remaining funds from 15-16, full-day kindergarten, first-time equipping money that now is planned to be spent hopefully in 16-17. So you see a significant increase in the planned spend and capital, but impacted by carry forward amounts, new allocations, and all of what will be spent is totally within the funding from the ministry. So now we move on to, as you know, I always say it's a forecast. We have to realize there are many variables at play all the time that could result in the present forecast not looking the same a few months from now, 6 months from now. So I think it's important for everyone to be aware of what risks we know are out there and what opportunities may come our way as well. And you will see that many of these items will appear as risks and will also appear as opportunities. The first one of those being our WSIB experience. Appears in both categories because we have to absorb any in-year change in that category in the year that it happens. So we are now working with our actuary on projecting costs of existing claims, getting some help from him to help us estimate better throughout the year where we may end up at the end of the year based on claims that we know today. And of course, we have preventative measures in place related to health and safety, which you'll hear about in February when our health and safety specialist comes here. However, still at risk are those new claims that can occur at any time, which we're not aware of today. So just to point out that there is a risk there that we have to keep our eye on. Conversely, there could be fewer claims than we thought, and there could be an opportunity for reduced cost. Moving on to benefits, I talked a little bit about that previously, and we always have a risk here for benefits usage, potentially because of moving into the provincial trusts. Possibly behavior may change. Behavior could change that people use their benefits more now that they have the benefits with Upper Canada and they know what they are. Some, uncertainty about what will happen when they move into the trusts. So there is a risk that there could be, we don't know, but there could be increased benefits usage. Conversely, there could be less usage or no change in the level of claims. So there could be an opportunity there. And we could have, as I said, we are conservative, I guess, with our benefit rates that we've incorporated at this point. But if we move into the trust sooner, we could see some favorability there under opportunities, benefit premiums. Not to jump you around too much, but because I'm talking about benefits now, I'll go to the third bullet under opportunities. We recently received a memo from the ministry saying that wanting boards to track their costs in-house, incremental costs that we would incur in preparing to move to the provincial trusts. So that means collecting data, analyzing data, potentially making changes to software, whatever that entails to be able to move the data that needs to go to the trusts and continue to send the money that needs to go to the trusts. We are asked to track that. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that we will be reimbursed for those costs. However, we may be reimbursed, so there's an opportunity there that may help us with any costs that we may incur. Another risk is semester 2 enrollment. We always talk about that. We know our October enrollment. We don't know for sure which of our students will return for second semester, where we will land versus original projections. So we always have some risk there. School operations, again, it's a risk, it could be an opportunity. If we have a bad weather or year in terms of weather, then we could incur more costs. But as has been the practice in Superintendent Hobbs' area, they are able to adjust within the budget to make sure that they don't overspend their allocation. However, it's good for us to be aware that weather does impact the costs. Conversely, if the weather is milder and facilities doesn't need to spend what they had predicted, that could help us at the end of the year, potentially with a small surplus. Another risk, pupil accommodation review expenses. I have that in both categories, risks and opportunities. We've budgeted for a full suite of expenses that we can anticipate at this point based on the initial staff report. So in the end, it will depend on the decisions that are made and the costs that we will need to incur in addition to what we already have as to where we land in that category. But something that we need to be aware of. And another opportunity, and this was on the list a year ago, it's been on the list for a while. This RECE pay equity is something that's been sitting there. I'm sorry that my voice is going, like the chair. Sorry. We have planned for the potential of a pay equity in this regard, but really this is still waiting for the issue with one board to be resolved, which could impact many boards. So it's just to point out that if it doesn't materialize, then there's some expenses that we won't need to incur. So those are the risks and opportunities that we have in our minds and have thought of as of tonight. And so finally, for my part, the multi-year financial plan, probably more legible on your screens. Just going to zero you in on the black circle about the middle. The original plan for 16-17 was, which was struck back in June of 2015, that we would basically be at a balanced budget point here. It's really a negative $100,000 was the original plan, and now we're showing an improvement over that with a $500,000 in-year surplus. The yellow bar is continuing to stay just above the $6 million green target line for accumulated surplus, which is the ministry standard. So that's positive that we're able to forecast again that we will be above that line. So that is the end of this portion of the presentation. I suggest you get some water.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll see how it goes.
I'm just wondering, because there's a lot of information there, if I should ask for comments or questions before we move over to you, Phil, just so we can keep them separate just for now. And so do we have any comments or questions at this point? Anyone on the phone lines?
I have no questions, thanks.
Thank you. All right, seeing there are none, thank you. I'll turn this over to Superintendent Dawes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nancy, for the introduction. So I do always appreciate the opportunity to update the Board of Trustees with respect to our enrollment situation, and you may recall last year I had the opportunity of tail-ending Nancy's presentation on revised estimates, and that seemed to work pretty well, so we thought we would do the same thing again this year. So that's the purpose of this presentation, and you'll see, as Nancy suggested in her presentation, a similar format to what I used last year, but maybe a little different this year. I did also want to give the Board of Trustees some information as it relates to what we call capture rate. Last time I was able to present a fulsome view on capture rate was in the spring of 2015 based on 2014 enrollments. I didn't have that opportunity last year, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to bring the board up to speed as it relates to 2015 capture rates, and as you'll see, a bit of a view as to what we're projecting in the way of capture rates based on early data that we have available to us. So I have an agenda for this presentation. I want to start, if I could, because it's so important to our understanding of enrollment trends, what we're seeing in the way of what I call system population trends across our board. And again, it will be a format that you're quite familiar with, but again, an update from that perspective. From the population trends, we then can have a clearer understanding of the why behind the enrollments that we're seeing across our board. So that's item 2. As I mentioned earlier, that'll lead into a presentation brief on capture rate, and a slide I've got as well on retention rates, because that's another good way of looking and understanding at some of the trends that we're seeing, particularly as they relate to key transition points across our board. And then I'd like to wrap things up with a bit of a view to the future and our next steps and progress that we're making as it relates to the work we've been doing with IT on Our Family Welcomes Yours. So let's start, if I could, with system population trends update. And this table in its general format was provided, again, as I mentioned, back in the spring of 2014 based on population and capture rate data I presented to the board at that time. Always nice to be able for us to understand the impact that population trends are having across our board. We're fortunate on our board to have access to annual population data, and the data that we get in Planning and Research Department, the Accountability Alignment Division, is specific to Revenue Canada as a source of information. It's annual data, it's updated every year, and it's very, very valuable to us because it's specific to preschool and school-age population. So over the years, as we've been talking about enrollment decline, trustees may recall, we were able to know in advance that the impact of an aging population of that cohort of echo boom students was going to impact our elementary panel before it would reach our secondary panel. And we knew that because we were able, in part, to look at the population trends that were happening across our region. So this is a format that I've shared with the board previously and illustrates, again, what we're seeing in the way of remaining enrollment decline across our board. Up at the top, you'll see an indication of total preschool-aged population to our board. These are not enrollments. These are an indication of preschool-aged total population resident to the Upper Canada District School Board area as a whole. And the salient takeaway point from that top row is the fact that there really hasn't been much of a change at all in the past 5 years. Our preschool age populations have stabilized. And that's a very good news story because it means that we'll see continued stabilization in our enrollments, elementary and eventually secondary, as those students become available to us in our school system. Similarly, the row below that shows elementary aged population, aged 4 to 13, aged population, not enrollments, total population, over a 5-year period. And you can see again, although we see a slight change over the 5-year period of a reduction of 1.38%, it's not significant anymore. If I was to show you these population figures 10 years ago, you would have seen a much more dramatic decrease in overall elementary age population that's available to our board. So again, that population layer has stabilized for all intents and purposes. The bottom row shows our secondary aged population, aged 14 to 17, and you can see the 5-year change on that particular age group is still significant at 18.82%. So this is the remaining impact of population change with that aging cohort of students that's working through our system, that we have about 2 or 3 more years left on the secondary panel before we expect it to even out the same way that it's happened to our elementary schools. So what does that all mean in terms of enrollment? And as you gathered from Nancy's presentation, for financial purposes, we tend to look at enrollment from an ADE perspective, ADE being 2 capture points. We've got the October 31st enrollments. We tend to, in planning and research, to look at enrollments from a headcount perspective quite often. That headcount gets transferred to what we call a full-time equivalent. You've got a headcount and full-time equivalent data point for October 31st and March 31st each year. When you take those 2 enrollment data points and average them by 2, that gives you your average daily enrollment for the entire year. So we have actual ADE figures for the years previous to this year. October 31st, as Nancy suggested, we're still firming up the numbers on the particular headcounts and FTEs. The March 31st enrollments won't be available to us until the end of March. So that's why when we talk about ADE right now, we're still talking about a projected figure. And so, again, we will be looking to firm up what we can expect in the way of March enrollments, and we're still in the process of actually finalizing the October 31st headcounts and FTE. But nonetheless, that's what we're dealing with. So these 2 graphs I shared last year in this format. The graph on the left demonstrates a historical view of our elementary ADE over the last 10-year period, including this year, which is a projected period, projected data point. To the right of that is the secondary ADE view over the same 10-year period. I want to draw your attention to that upward swing that happens on the elementary panel for the 2014-15 year. That's a reflection of the change over to full-day kindergarten, okay? So if we were comparing apples and apples, what you would see on that elementary line, the salient takeaway point on that is that leveling out of those enrollments. So those last three-year data points to the right of that graph, you can see how our elementary ADE has leveled out. Of course, on the secondary side, it's a different story. You can see the decline in secondary ADE that's happened over the 10-year period. And again, if we were to move that forward, you would see a leveling out of that particular line expected over the next probably 2 more years. It's a slightly different view. What I'm doing here is just taking those previous graphs but showing it specific to the last 3 years and showing you for comparative purposes what we projected versus what we're seeing in the way of actual ADE. And I'll again remind you that the ADE for this year is still a projected figure. But the takeaway from this is to show the variation that can occur between projected and actual ADE. This year, as Nancy suggested, we've got an ADE actual based on October numbers, which is coming in a bit higher than we projected, which is certainly a good news story. We need to remind ourselves this isn't an enrollment increase, it's simply a comparison of our actuals versus what we originally projected. To the left of that is an indication of head count. So those are the student head counts that we were using to develop our projections from which the ADE was calculated and how those actually materialized on a grade-by-grade basis based on October 31st figures. I think what the interesting point on those particular numbers on the left is the increase in overall enrollment that we saw compared to projected on the junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten rows, or I should say columns. And I'll speak a bit more to that when I get to capture rate, but I was quite interested and optimistic on those particular numbers. On the secondary front, again, just building a little more on the last 3 years, and you can see how close we've been this year and in previous years on our actual ADE compared to original projections. When we look at that on a grade-by-grade headcount perspective, I think what stands out is the grade 12 numbers came in lower than projected by about 63 students based on early numbers on that front. And I think that speaks to we're interested in trying to understand the impact of the returning students for 5th year in grade 12, and we've been trying to follow what we see as a trend in that respect, and we're continuing to work on that. But our overall, we're within 80 students. We came in 80 students higher than projected as a headcount figure. So now a few words, if I could, about capture rate. And capture rate, trustees will recall, is a critical success factor of the board. Capture rate is a way of understanding the proportion of enrollments we're getting in our schools related to actual population. So in a minute I'm going to be able to show you system-wide capture rates, and what you want to remember is that it's a comparison of enrollment versus the total population specific for that particular age group. Excuse me. So for example, what I'm showing on this graph is the capture rates for 3 transition points that we're always interested in for our board. And transition point, I mean the transition point of students entering our system at junior and senior kindergarten. So the red line is showing junior and senior kindergarten combined capture rates. The green line is showing the trends last 5 years for grade 7 entry level. And to the top is our grade 9 capture rates. So JK-SK capture rate is an indication of enrollment as a proportion of the total age 4 and 5 population for the entire Upper Canada District School Board area. The green line is showing grade 7 enrollments as a proportion of the total age 13 population for the entire Upper Canada District School Board area. And the blue line is showing grade 9 enrollments as a proportion of the total age 14 population that resides within the Upper Canada District School Board area. interesting takeaway on this is I'd like to remind ourselves, well, myself too, of what a change in capture rate really means. So you'll see from the information on the left, a 1% change in the JK capture rate across our board only represents about 38 students total. A 1% change in grade 7 capture rate is about 37 students. Similarly, a 1% change in grade 9 capture rate is 35 students. Not to minimize the impact of us understanding this particular data set, but just to provide a context for you of what that means in terms of actual students. Attached to the placeholder report for this presentation, I've provided you with a school-by-school breakdown of capture rates for the 2014 period, which you received a couple of years ago, as I mentioned, and now updated for 2015. I don't yet have capture rates available for 2016 for a couple of reasons. Again, we're still finalizing our actual enrollments for the October 31st date, and we've only just recently received access to the population data specific for this year. But nonetheless, it's always interesting to be able to take those total system-wide figures and break them down on a school-by-school basis and on a feeder group schools basis. A couple of things that you'll want to be aware of when you look at this particular data, and it always good to apply some caution. The first one I want to bring to your attention is when you see a school that has what we call a dual track program. So a school that has an English program and has an English program attendance boundary and might also have an early French immersion program boundary that's larger than its regular English program boundary. So it's drawing from a larger area. Just for the sake of this data set, we've applied the larger area. So you're taking an enrollment, but you're taking a population data set that's from a much larger geographical area. So what you'll tend to see is a capture rate for those particular schools that appears to be lower than their comparative schools that offer the regular English program. The other thing you want to bear in mind, I think, is the difference that geography has as an impact on these data. So really what we're looking at when we look at capture rate is a deeper understanding of what proportion of the total population that's available to a school is that school actually receiving. Well, depending on the communities that schools serve, really it's going to vary the impact of that particular outcome. So in parts of our board where we have a much higher French speaking language population group, we would expect to see a lower capture rate figure. And you'll see that come through in the data when you look at them. My other caution might be 2 years doesn't necessarily make a trend. And as you saw from my previous slide on system capture rates, we know in our particularly low enrollment schools that just the change of 1 or 2 students can have a rather apparent profound impact on capture rate, but it might not be an actually significant number of students that we're talking about. So draw that in mind as well. The other one, if I could, is just to always remember how this particular data set is calculated. So it's possible, for example, that a school could see a smaller number of enrollments, but an increase in its capture rate because it's enrollment as a proportion of total population. So it's theoretically possible for a school to have a lower enrollment, but proportionately that lower enrollment is not as much as the decline in population available to it, right? So it just depends on the variation between enrollment and actual population availability. However, I think it's an interesting data set to look at. I think the column that I really like to look at on this is the ones to the right that show the capture rate by feeder group, because that's showing the total enrollment for all of the feeder group schools together as a group compared to the population available for that entire group. And it gives you an understanding from a larger community perspective about how many students we're attracting as a proportion of that population. So as you'll recall from the system numbers that I showed you, you can see at the bottom here I've provided you with an overall board as a whole view that totals up to the same numbers that I showed previously in the other slide. And also an indication on the handout that I provided to your placeholder report, an indication of what our projected capture rate is for 2016. What you're looking at on this one is just, again, a school-by-school breakdown, but for the grade 7 and grade 9 capture rates. I mentioned earlier at the front end, there's another data set that we'd like to look at in planning and research to get an understanding of how we're doing at key transition points, and we call that our retention rate view. What I'm doing here is looking at enrollments from one year as a proportion of how many of those students were in place the year previous. So if I could show you, for example, the green column on the right, that's showing transition point retention rates for the grade 8 to grade 9 transitions, and it's quite interesting. You'll see for 2016, for example, that we had 9.9% more students across our system in grade 9 than we had in grade 8 the year before, right? And over the last 4 years, that transition rate, retention rate, has been actually quite stable. 107.4% in 2013, you can see the numbers. It hasn't changed too much. But this most recent data point was quite encouraging in that respect. Similarly, junior kindergarten to senior kindergarten. In 2016, we had 4.6% more students in senior kindergarten than we had in junior kindergarten the year before. What I think might be really of interest to trustees is the grade 6 to 7 retention rate, where you can see historically we haven't managed to retain the same number of students system-wide in grade 7 that we have in grade 6 the year before. So 2016, for example, is indicating that we were able to maintain 96.3% of the students that were in our schools in grade 6 last year, for example. So what does all this mean in terms of moving forward? Well, we have a theory in the communications department that we work from, and that theory is that in reaching out to parents through communication processes, we're hoping to convince them or entice them to visit their local school, because it's at their local school where they can see firsthand the wonderful things that are happening in our schools. And there are wonderful things happening in our schools. And we think if we can get parents to visit schools, they'll make an informed decision to register with the Upper Canada District School Board through a deeper knowledge of their community school. But we're also interested in, and I'm going to give my thanks to Superintendent Hobbs for this one. You'll recall a couple of these slides from his branding presentation a few weeks ago, just before Christmas. And the big takeaway from that particular presentation was the big idea that what we're really about right now in talking about branding is refining our touch points with parents through underlying processes. And so in the communications department, the work that we were doing on kindergarten registration and registration generally has been a concerted effort beginning last year to align our processes through My Family Room. And we've seen some encouraging results in that respect. We see a real opportunity in working with IT to understand how parents signing up for My Family Room can also use that to register for UCDSB schools online, and also use that information available to us through My Family Room to continue to reach out and build upon those touch points with parents so that we can establish a relationship with those folks and keep them informed from a system perspective, but probably more importantly to keep working with our schools so that we can assist them in maintaining those communication flow processes with parents and maintain that relationship. So based on early work that we started last year, we're quite encouraged with the results that we've seen so far. But for example, between November 15 and November 2016, there were 951 new student online registrations through My Family Room, and 732 of those were for junior and senior kindergarten through the kindergarten registration process. So really our plan for this year is to continue to work on that relationship and those touchpoint processes to do whatever we can to entice people to join the UCDSB family. So with that, Chair, thank you for the time, and be happy to take any questions.
Very good. I'm going to open it up to comments or questions. Trustee Wendy McPherson?
Thanks for that. As one, I'll tell you, I love this kind of information. This is the kind of stuff I think is helpful as a trustee. So keep it coming. I just wanted to go back to slide 4, where you talk about the stabilities by geographics. Is it? I mean, it's interesting, but my thing is where are those kids? So is it at all possible to see a map as to where the 0 to 3s are? Because that to me would be more helpful than just sort of like, we're stable across, but where are they?
Sure. Yeah, we do have access to that information, and I'm always interested in finding ways to demonstrate data in different manners. So you're right. Showing data from a geographical perspective is work that we've done before, and I'd be happy to do it again if it would be valuable to folks. Okay.
The other one was with regards to when you were talking about. I didn't mark down which slide it was. You were talking about. For the capture rates of the elementary schools, you took the French immersion boundary, and for other schools that would be, or the English boundary would go into those. How did that work? Like I'm not quite certain. Like
through you, Chair. If I could, I'll try and explain again without naming any particular schools.
Right.
If we have some schools where they offer both French and immersion. In some of our schools, the attendance area for both those programs is exactly the same. In other schools that we've got in our board, those schools have 2 attendance areas.
Right.
They have an attendance area for the English program that tends to be small and surrounds the school quite compressed. They also have a French and immersion program that draws students from other school regular English program boundary areas. So that's what I would call an overlapping attendance boundary.
Right.
So the capture rate for English would be specific to that local area, how many students are in English as a proportion of the population that's resident to that smaller area. Mm-hmm. But for those particular schools, what we've done is we've taken the total enrollment as a proportion of the population that's resident to that big area that is overlapping all of the other school areas for that particular feeder
all right.
group.
So that was my question, was that the schools that were non-immersion,
Right.
their English capture rates were not going to be part of that the immersion, English or whatever, those students. That's the kind of definition I'm trying to get.
Through you, Chair, on the population front, it's actually kind of a double counting, isn't it?
Okay, that's what I
right.
wanted to say.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The other question, if I can, just one last one. That was just very quick. Is there any possibility to find out what the other boards are doing with regards to capture rates?
Through you, Chair. We tend not to have access easily even to enrollment data from other boards, and I don't tend to have a data set that's specific to population, so on both fronts it's rather
how do you monitor to see if they're doing the same sort of thing on their...
We really have to kind of speculate based on what we're seeing from our own capture rates. You take 100 and subtract out what our capture rate, and you have an indication of how many people are going to other boards, but right, yeah.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you. Trustee McAllister.
Thank you. I have a question with regard to the capture rate. It's more of a comment than anything, but every year, every time this comes up, we find ourselves in the same position, wondering how the capture rate for the Upper Canada District School Board can be increased. And I understand what we're doing with regard to branding and the parent and community experience, the digital touch points, and I think those are extremely valuable. But I guess my question is probably to the director, and that is, to what extent is this really an ongoing priority for this board, and if so, how?
Mr. Chair, through you. For the largest portion of time in Ontario, public school boards were the board of choice for parents because it was the only board that received full funding. And so up to the early 1980s, we would have had a capture rate that would have far surpassed anything that we're reporting right now. We know that when the province went to a more broad view about how to fund different school systems, that it gave parents then parallel choices and opportunities to pursue for their family that they thought was best. We would maintain as a public school board that we have to have a presence because we need to ensure that the public always has a choice of attending one of our schools. What is happening in all public school boards is that they're starting to look at their model of how they provide points of access for public education programs through more of a regional structure and not so much on a community by community basis. And when we think of that, that's almost about how the healthcare system has had to look at how they're delivering health support in different parts of the province. So, for example, is when there needs to be cardiac care in our region, we're not immediately served in Smiths Falls or Brockville or Cornwall. It would be Kingston. And that's because there's been a co-location of resources and expertise in Eastern Ontario in that area, and with pre- and post-care available in your local community. And I take it that that has been a very difficult choice because it meant where do you put your resources and serve your public. And I think we're asking ourselves the same question as a public school board, is where do we put our resources to serve the public? So I think it is a priority because we're constantly trying to take a snapshot about are we putting our resources where our public is showing us where there is the greatest amount of interest, and at the same time a reasonable geography of access. It wouldn't mean that their children would have to be taking transportation for an inordinate amount of time that would be unreasonable, but at the same time that we're looking at, as we're in a demographic decline, we're looking at the question about do we have the right schools in the right places, and that's not the only discussion that we're having in our school board these days, and it's not the only school board that's having that kind of discussion. And I guess lastly, Mr. Chair, I'd want to draw to the trustees' attention that when Superintendent Dawes did a presentation around enrollments in the spring, he did share with us Stats Canada data for our region. And one of the trends that's also challenging for us is that it's not just a capture rate, but it's a capture rate of a smaller number of students who are school age. So Stats Can data from 2001 to 2006 showed that there was a 5.8% decline in the number of school-age children that we serve in our school board. Then in the next census snapshot from 2006 to 2011, there was an 8.5% decrease in the number of school-aged children. So when you look at that trajectory, then what it means is that our capture rate continues to be challenged by not just choice, where do parents choose to send their children to school, but by the number of children that are actually available to go to school. And I think that's another key point that we have to be mindful of because, again, we are funded per pupil in the current model that the provincial government uses for determining its transfer payment to the school district every year. And at the same time, we also are trying to make sure that we're not contributing to a decline of the number of students that we serve by not offering programs that mean a lot to families and that their children are experiencing success. So that means that we hope that families then would send the next sibling to school, or that relatives would send other children, their own children, to our schools as well. So I know that this is not something new to the board, that they've talked about capture rate and demographic rates. I know that the board has talked about this since, intensively for 10 years. But prior to that, when the school board amalgamated in 1997-98, we inherited a situation that we're still making adjustments to. and that is how many students are available to serve, in which communities, and are we trying to maintain our rates of enrollment given declining enrollment and given choice.
Supplementary, please. I understand demographics, but that factor is equal to all groups, so it's not specific to us. I guess I would like to use the analogy of our numeracy and literacy strategies in our individual schools, where we have targeted strategies for students, especially students in perhaps difficulty or whatever. Is there or should there not be a school goal, an individual school goal, where applicable, to increase the capture rate? That is the specific thing that I guess that I'm targeting right now.
Well, Mr. Chair, that's a really important question to ask. I would say that schools are already invested in that role by showing that they're attentive, caring, and responsive to children and families. And we know what happens when the opposite prevails, and that is that parents don't think they're being well served, and we lose families. I don't believe that that has been the mission of individual schools. The mandate of schools is around student achievement and well-being, and it reflects the mandate of the board. And I would think if we're doing our part as a central board and as a central staff, we're advertising, promoting, and welcoming parents to see what we do really well, so that they would choose to come here. So I don't discount that schools have an interest in seeing families come back each year, and that our student population remains robust, especially at the secondary school levels, where that has implications for timetabling choices and the robust nature of the pathways that we offer. But I do think that the primary mission of each school reflects the mission of the school board around achievement and well-being, and I don't think we have been in the business of site-by-site marketing or promotion.
Thank you. Trustee McDonald.
Thank you. I have a number of comments and questions as well. And just to pick up on the school-by-school basis, I just want to bring trustees back to March 2015, where we passed a motion. The Board of Trustees request the Director share the present capture rate with principals of schools, and request the principals beginning September 2015 develop strategies to support our 1% system goal to increase the capture rate, and to build strategies into their success plan in September 2016. So we've established a 1% goal across the board, but we had wanted it to be shared with principals, knowing that we didn't put specific goals on schools, but we had a board-wide goal. Now, having said that, I think it's important for us to step back or go up in the helicopter for a second. We're talking about capture rate in the context that we're talking about revised estimates around our budget, and it's an important piece to keep in mind. Because when we talk about capture rate, or we talk about our budget, I guess more specifically, our budget is there are two components to it: our revenue and our expenses. We can control how much money we spend, and we can by reducing the amount of money that we spend, and by reducing the expenses overall that we have. We also can control the revenue that we have by increasing the number of students. A number of our goals have been around increasing the international education component, but also that 1% goal around capture rate was an attempt to make sure that we didn't lose as much revenue, so that we didn't have to then decrease our expenses. So when we talk about a 1% goal, overall, even though, if we go back to slide 4 for a second, from 2000, or in a 5-year change, I guess, we have a net decrease of 19%. 1% increase per year doesn't even come close to replacing the 19% of students that are not there, right? This isn't a situation that the kids have chosen somewhere else. The 1% is our attempt to capture those other kids. We are losing children in the sense that there are less children. And the pace that we are trying to look at it on the 0 to 3 preschool, it's not ever going to make up for the amount that we're going to lose in secondary. We don't see that bubble again of elementary students coming through. So we have to make an attempt to increase our capture rate where possible so that we don't decrease our expenses even more, because the less revenue we have, the less expenses we can actually expend. I want to go back to the slide about the 1% capture rate. And the 1% capture rate was intended to be per year over a period of years, 15 to 20. And that's cumulative though, right? Like, it's not just 1% and we're done. It's cumulative. And it's 1% of our overall population, not just at certain grade levels. So we just take a snapshot of what we have today. We have 26,000 students. That's 260 students. We add 260 students this year, our 1% then goes up a little bit more, right? Because the 260 are part of the next 26,000. So as we accumulate, we're potentially increasing our population, our student enrollment by a little bit more if we can gain that capture rate even more. So the 1% is cumulative. It's not one and done. You keep what you got, you get another 1%. That's the intent. Now, when we look at what we've done so far in capture rate and retention rate, and I want to go to the slide on retention, slide 20, we talk about how we've done an increase in our previous year for JK to SK and grade 8 to grade 9. Well, we should at least be at 100% for sure, because those students are not leaving buildings, right? They're in our buildings. We should get at least 100% of those kids and move them into the next grade level. I think part of our difference from JK to SK is that not every parent chooses to send their child, their 4-year-old, to school. So we see an increase potentially there. Grade 8 to grade 9, I think it's important for us to come back and look at the slide where we talk about what we're losing in grade 12. When we talk about capture rate and we talk about a retention rate, it's one thing to look at entry points, but it's important for us to understand what the mix is across the board. If we have 106% from 8 to 9, but we lose that 6% or more in grade 12, there should be some red flags. Why are we losing? And all that net gain that we had in grade 8 to grade 9 has been lost by the final year. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we continue to focus on capture rate, that we continue to have these reports, that we continue to have an opportunity to look and discuss ways on how we can increase it and support it through the budget. Now, one of the questions that I do have, Mr. Chair, was an explanation of around capture rate, and I think it was around the slide just as we were, but I want to go back to where we were transitioning from capture rate to retention rate, and when Mr. Dawes explained some context around what capture rate was in context to enrollment. And if I could just get that relayed again.
At 12?
Page 11, or slide 11.
I know what the slide says. I'm asking Mr. Dawes for his explanation that he had when he was talking around that particular slide. I was confused. I guess maybe my colleagues are confused, because when I listened to Mr. Dawes, I was confused. I understand what capture rate is, but I was confused to say that capture rate is adjusted based on enrollment. Is that what you said? Or enrollment is not a true reflection of capture rate?
Through you, Chair, maybe it was the point I was trying to make about interpreting what you see in capture rate increase or decrease as it relates to actual enrollments.
Right.
Right. So I use the example, if a school's enrollment increased, but let me get this right. If a school's enrollment decreased, but the population available to that particular area decreased more than proportionally the enrollment, it's possible the capture rate would be seen as an increase even though the enrollment itself didn't increase. I just use that as an example.
I agree and disagree a little bit, because if capture rate is a particular number based on the available students that are out there, capture rate shouldn't move if the population adjusts. Right? Because it's contingent upon population, available population. The number of students we have compared to the number of students available is our capture rate. If the number of students go down and the number of overall students go down and enrollment goes down, capture rate is again adjusted based on available students. If available students stays the same and enrollment goes down, capture rate is changed. You understand where I'm coming from? Capture rate, in your own definition, shouldn't change if there's a change in the available students. The number is going to change, but the philosophy of capture rate stays the same, right? Your capture rate, if everything adjusts accordingly, if your population available population goes down and your enrollment goes down the same amount, capture rate's the same. If available population goes down and your enrollment goes up, capture rate goes up. Capture rate doesn't get adjusted if the population available changes. It's a percentage of each of the two. So I just want to make sure that trustees understand that, right? Like, you understand what I'm explaining?
Oh, I am. I'm just watching the minds working back there, and in terms of trying to to bring clarity to their minds as well.
I'll move on. I think
No, and the reason I say that is I know what you're trying to get at, but I'm also noticing that in their minds it's not quite as simple, and they're trying to find ways to word it. So at least that's how I'm interpreting my view. However, that being said, you want to move ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my question earlier when I said about the cumulative effect of capture rate, if I'm reading the chart on page 12 correctly, we had a goal for 2015 of 1% increase. What was our end result in 2015?
Yeah, I think this graph shows it the best. So our 2015 on junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten capture rate in 2015 was 44.8%. That compared to the year previous, which was 46.1%, right? Yeah. And we're projecting, based on what our enrollment and projected population is right now, JKSK participation rate, capture rate for this year of 45.3. But that's a projection at this point.
Right. Mr. Chairman. So my point, trustees, is that we had a goal of increasing by 1% in 2015, but it looks like we had a decrease, a net decrease. We're projecting an increase for this year, and some of it may pick up from last year. But I go back to my earlier point about a cumulative measurement. The 1% at the time didn't specify a one and done. It was 1% per year. And we needed to make sure that we try to maintain that. So as we move forward, and to pick up on what Trustee McAllister said, I think it's important that we have those initiatives in place to support increasing the capture rate where possible in schools, so that it leads to the 1% goal across the board.
Okay, thank you. Director, you've got all that? Okay, Trustee Kirkner.
Just a comment that Trustee McAllister said about what are we doing, and then referring to Trustee McDonald's 1%, a reminding of the 1% increase we were looking for. I truly believe that we are, especially at the entry points, kindergarten, JK and SK, and also at the grade 6 to 7 level, that the schools are truly trying to increase the population, or at least keep the population that they have from 6 to 7 into their schools. I really believe the principals and the staffs are working on that in the schools that I've been in, I have to say. Now the JKSK, perhaps there's room for even more recruitment out there if they get into the communities more. I don't know what the answer is, but I just want to comment on the 6 to the 7 that trying to retain what we have is happening out there. I think they truly are working on that.
And may I, Mr. Chair? And to your point, Trustee Kartner or Vice Chair Kartner, I agree. I think that we are, despite our best efforts of trying to achieve a 1% goal, we are down. We were down last year. You see some increase projected this year. So again, not despite our best efforts, but in light of our best efforts, we see the increase. It's not an indication that people aren't trying. It's just an indication that it's that competitive in the marketplace for every student that's out there. And I think that's the piece that we need to focus on, is how are we going to make sure that we are top of mind with communities, with parents, when they make a choice, whether it's JK, SK, or anywhere transition. I mean, grade 5 seems to be a little bit of a spike across the board. So wherever there are transitions or at any point in time, how do we become top of mind for those parents? And so I agree, Trustee Kartner, that we are, efforts are in place to make sure that we do that. But I guess the caution or the warning sign for trustees is that with fewer students available and a more competitive nature, we need to be cognizant of everything that we do, especially around our budget, which is, again, capture rate is leading up to that whole budget discussion, right? This is where it started, around revised estimates. So we've done good this year because we've got an influx of 168 elementary students, I think it was. So that's helping us. Our expenses have gone up in line with that. $1 million for EAs, which we kind of anticipated when we passed the budget. But if our expenses go up and our revenue goes down, we have even tougher decisions. That's what we need to continue to focus on. So as we have our budget discussions and revised estimates, the next 6 months when we pass our budget, we've got to keep all those things in mind. So are there things that we can do to support in other areas, despite the projects that we have underway right now to help capture rate and even an international student standpoint, which is part of capture rate in a sense.
Thank you. Trustee Cram?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me up there?
I certainly can. Welcome to the board.
Thank you. A couple of issues still on slide 12. For Mr. McDonald's mathematics, I think the 214 to 215 drop was actually 2.4% of capture rate, but from the projected enrollment from 15 to 16 is 2.4 to recover it. However, I guess my question on it is, if we look at the secondary level, and we use 50% as an arbitrary capture rate for across the board, even though our secondary enrollment is going down, we're still maintaining at least some sort of a semblance of a reasonable capture rate. But if we start looking at the elementary section, even though the left-hand side says, don't worry about the 1%, it's not very many people to look at the JKSK, that's a drop of below 50% of 179 students. And that would tell me that's in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 classrooms. And then if we also look at the elementary one from the grade 7 level, you're looking at a lower than 50% of about 85 students. And that's somewhere around 3 classrooms. So we're actually looking at being 10 to 12 classrooms below a 50% capture rate. So I think we really need to look at, I know we're trying our best and we need to look at stuff, but we really need to look at why are we only recovering 45% of the population at the JKSK level, and the increase from last year is not a lot. And at the grade 7 level, it's almost stagnant. We're not increasing at all at that elementary level. So I think maybe some of our resources need to go in there. That's just my own personal take on slide 12. So I think we have some work to do. That's my take. Talk to you later. I'm still here, y'all.
Well, thank you, Trustee Cram. Trustee Bill McPherson.
Yeah. I'm kind of lonely over here all by myself, so I
noticed that.
better make some noise. First off, I hope this is shared with our principals. A lot of information here. I'm going to raise the question through the chair of cross-boundary students. I'm looking at Montague Public School here, and they've got a 100% capture rate. In today's reality of multiple choices, I cannot see that that is possible. There are definitely students coming out of Montague that are attending the Catholic school system. However, I do know that Montague is home to a huge number of cross-boundary students coming from Duncan J. Schooler catchment zone, which showed a 10% decrease from 29% to 19%, which for a school in the western part of the board is not exactly good news. We have to note that this reflects the demographics of the board. We have a low of 12% in the east and a high of 72% capture rate in the west. The further east we go, the more choices people have, simply because of language and religion. So my question is, given that parents are allowed to register kindergarten students in the school of their choice, how does that affect our calculation of the capture rate? Do we identify which students are coming cross-boundary, or do we simply count the number of kindergarten kids walking in the front door? Through the chair.
Through you, Chair. Great question. Thank you. You're correct, Trustee. We're simply looking at the enrollment as a comparison of the resident population. So the enrollment is not necessarily resident to the attendance area. The population is resident to the attendance area, if you understand what I'm saying. So an enrollment at a school would include cross boundaries coming in, or for example, cross boundaries going out. That's as a proportion of the population that's resident. So the enrollment is not necessarily resident, the population is resident. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? No, Trustee Cram. Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for the presentation. I also want to thank Carol McEwen, and of course I never miss an opportunity to thank Michael Law, and I like to always brag that I taught Michael Law, except I have to be honest. I mean, I could leave it there and everyone could go, wow, that guy, I mean, he knows his math. I didn't teach him math. John Morgan, who was a great math teacher, taught. I'm sure gave you the love for math because it wasn't me, and I'd love to take the credit though. So thank you very much for the presentation tonight. Okay, moving on to the next item. We have membership in 2 associations, and I'm going to read the motion first, and then I'm going to ask 2 of our members from those associations to talk about it. The first organization is OPSPA. And our membership fees for that is $65,810 per year. And the other is OSTA, and our membership for that is just $1,600 a year. So we're at that point now where we have to renew our membership. So I need a mover and a seconder that the Upper Canada District School Board renew the 2017-2018 membership for the Ontario Public Schools Board Association, OSPA, and the Ontario Student Trustee Association. I'll leave out the French translation. Do I have a mover? Okay, Trustee McDonald, Trustee McAllister. And so now I'd like to turn it over to, I think I'll go with the student trustee first, if you're okay with that. And I'm going to ask Trustee Meyer if you will talk a little bit about OSTA and justify, really, or give us some rationale why OSTA is important to us and important to the students.
All right. Well, I'll give you guys a little overview of what OSTA is, although I'm sure all of you are aware of what it is. OSTA ACO is the largest student stakeholder in education and the voice for the student vision. As representatives of over 2 million students, we are a dynamic, diverse voice. We act as consultants on the policy for the Ministry of Education, collaborate with stakeholders in the education community, and work to unite all student trustees across the province. Whether it is school boards across the province or at the provincial level, the Ontario Student Trustees Association and all of its members continue to play an integral role in crafting the future of public education in Ontario. So OSTA ACO personally has been a huge part of my experience of being a trustee so far. They are a huge support system as well as peer mentors. From going to my very first conference with Alex last May, they had an incoming student trustee workshop that taught us so much as to what was going to come and made connections to be in contact with if I had any questions going into any of this, which was a huge help as well as a relief. As to know that you weren't the only one going through this change and many were there to help. Being a part of OSTA also lets you become part of something bigger than your school board, as you're advocating for students in all of Ontario and not just those in your school board. We get the chance to discuss as a committee of a whole, in our board councils, and then also in the committees we decide on joining. It lets you gain excellent experience and get some amazing opportunities through it. With the guest speakers that get brought into the conference, you get the opportunity to meet some people and organizations that you may not otherwise get to. It's also the opportunity to get in contact with different individuals and organizations that may help in the future with your specific school board. For example, during FGM, we met Norm Miller, the mayor of Toronto. So he's a pretty cool guy to meet, and I mean, it's pretty cool to say that I met the Six Dad, so that's what everyone calls him. But it's the connections you make at OSTA that make it the experience it is. It's a great support system, as we are all student trustees and we understand and go through similar scenarios as student trustees. I know I've gained some unbelievable friends through OSTA that I'll always stay in contact with, and they're not only great friendships, so they're people that I can go to and reference to and get help with anything I may need. Overall, OSTA has been nothing but a positive experience for me and has given me nothing but amazing opportunities and more confidence to be a student trustee. And I could not be more thankful for what OSTA has brought to me so far and look forward to more experience that I get from it.
Okay. Just to reinforce one of the things you said, I understand Shayla is still in touch with OSTA student trustees and continues to have friendship. I know you don't have an official vote. Are you making a recommendation that the board consider keeping its membership in this association? Okay. Thank you. Now you've been set up. That was a great presentation. Now I'm passing it over to Trustee McDonald. You can kind of talk a little bit about OSPA and why we would be spending $65,810.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, I represent the board, so there. Well, to put it in context, around $65,000. The money does come out of our governance and administration line, and it is funded by the province. So it isn't something that's being removed from the classroom in any way. It isn't something that's being removed from the overall spending of the board. It is a direct line funded by the ministry for our participation and membership at OPSPA. You hear me talk on a regular basis at our board meetings about OPSPA, and very proud to represent this board on OPSPA for a number of years. OPSPA does represent 31 public district school boards across the province and 10 public school authorities. Again, I say they represent school boards. They don't represent students. They represent the boards. However, they do advocate for students. They do advocate for English public education in the province. So they are our voice on many, many matters across the province around funding, around environmental policy, around curriculum, around many things that impact the day-to-day life of our students. They have a direct impact for us and a benefit for us when it comes to negotiations. We know how the landscape has changed around negotiations. They are our contact, they are our lead on negotiations on the provincial matters. As well, there are many offshoots of OPSPA around the Energy Coalition. We benefit from the work that the Energy Coalition does to negotiate or at least stop rates from increasing at the Energy Board, whether it be through electricity or the gas companies, Enbridge and Union Gas. And their work really allows a financial benefit back to school boards. Another piece of the work that OPSPA does that potentially has some financial rewards for boards is the work that OPSPA has taken on lead across the country on copyright rules. We know that there's been a significant attempt by, I can't think of the name right now, but by the group to see a greater amount of money that's paid by public institutions, universities, schools in general for the fees that they would have around copyright. So we've been able to negotiate rates down that are considerably low and allow for our students to continue to use photocopies, access information within the schools, and not having to worry about paying excessive fees to promote their education and have an excellent educational journey. And finally, one of the key components, and the link is here for OPSPA to go to the website. The link is here for the key works of OPSPA in the report. And I encourage you to take a look at that. But one of the particular things that is a key work is around trustee development, professional development. And OPSPA does a tremendous job by putting out the resources. I think there's 13 or 14 modules now, 17 modules now around professional development and what it is to be a trustee and how to deal with certain circumstances across the boards. They also put out, throughout the course of the year, our conferences. So we have a public education symposium, a labor relations symposium. There is a northern symposium that's generally related for northern trustees, but all trustees are encouraged to go to give them a perspective on the north. And again, at our AGM, where we have speakers come in and talk about things around strategic planning, around school consolidations, around legal issues, around program issues, around corporate issues, on how best to function as a corporate board at times. So I'm proud, Mr. Chair, to support the motion to continue to be a member of OPSPA, and I think that the work that OPSPA does on behalf of all the boards across Ontario, that we have their support and their tireless work that they do on behalf of all our boards and indirectly for our students.
Can you add a little bit about something that I'm sure Peter Guerrero would mention?
Oh, First Nation, Métis, yes,
Yeah.
certainly. So Indigenous education is now the focus, and certainly that has taken on a new role around our key works. And it was embedded many times within our education program side of things. But around Indigenous education, we have an Indigenous Trustees Council led by Trustee Guerrero. And certainly a number, what we've seen, and Trustee Guerrero can attest to this, we've seen a number of trustees from across the province have now come forward and are participating in a great way. We had a First Nation trustee for many, many years, but we didn't seem to have a voice across the province from the Indigenous circle. So we've increased that. Trustee Guerrero really has increased that. And we have an opportunity to really move the agenda forward as it relates to Indigenous pupils and the response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The work that that group is doing with ministry staff, minister, and different working groups associated to the ministry has been exemplary and certainly leading a way for many students in our province. And I think it will have a spillover effect across the country.
Thank you. All right, any comments or questions before I bring the motion forward?
I do, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
My suggestion is to split the membership. I'm certainly in favor of both of them, but I think procedure-wise they should be split in case somebody has an objection to one over the other, and it seems to me to be better business practices to do that.
He's calling for separation of the question, which is fine.
Any objections to a separation on the motion?
I don't think he can.
A separation on the...
Once he asks for it, we have to do it.
Have to do it?
Yeah.
So now I need two separate
motions. Yeah.
Why do people do this to me? Okay.
I'd be happy to do the second.
Would you do that? Trustee Cram, thank you. Okay, so we have two separate motions. The first is that the Upper Canada District School Board renew the 2017-18 membership for the Ontario Public School Boards Association. Do I have a mover for that? Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Armour. Thank you. And I'll ask you any comments or questions. Cast your votes on that, please. And that carries. Thank you very much. Trustee Wendy McPherson, I assume yes. Thank you. And the second motion is that the Upper Canada District School Board renew the 2017 membership for, I got it here, Ontario Student Trustee Association. Moved by Trustee Karkner, Trustee McDonald. Comments or questions? Cast your votes, please. And thank you for that comment, Trustee Cram.
You're welcome.
Okay, are you going to vote on that, Trustee Cram?
I just did.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That carries. Okay, moving on to the next item.
Remember that digital stuff travels a long way when it has to travel an hour and a half to get here.
Yeah, we almost would buy that. Thank you. Okay, student trustee Grace Meyer, will you give us a report from the student side of things?
More than happy to.
Okay.
So on December 9th, 2016, the UCDSB Student Senate met for their second meeting of the school year at Roebuck Hall in Spencerville. I'd like to thank the Chair of the Board, Jeff McMillan, First Vice Chair Carol Clarkner, Trustee McAllister, Trustee Wendy McPherson, and Trustee Garrow for being in attendance. The meeting featured a full agenda with lots of discussion and conversation that included team building and leadership activities, guest speaker Trustee Peter Garrow and Student Senator Tanka Thompson on a presentation of residential schools, a discussion on mental health, and a discussion and planning of our C4K Day video. So overall, it was a very successful day with lots of engaging conversation. We started off the meeting with a welcome back and a few team building games, which brought everyone back together and ready to discuss and work. It was also ugly holiday sweater themed, so everyone was wearing their ugly sweaters that day. We did have a competition as well, and it was well thought out. I think it went well. After a bit of an introduction, we had a presentation by Trustee Peter Garrow and Student Senator Tanka Thompson. Their presentation was on residential schools. It contained a history, statistics, present actions to date, the role of institutions, as well as other informational and discussion topics. Their presentation started with the acknowledgement of the traditional territory of the Mohawks of Akwesasne, and then began the Thanksgiving address that all senators participated in and read a section of. They spoke about the demographics of the community with some statistics and logistics of the population, as well as what was in the community, as well as the two-row wampum, which represents an agreement of peace and friendship. It is separate but connected, the river of life, parallel travel, and the autonomy, as well as the significance of the silver covenant chain. They then spoke about the terminology and how each language group has their own term. The presentation continued with a brief history on the First Peoples, and then some statistics that many were unaware of, myself included. One statistic that really stood out to me was being that the suicide rate is 2 times the Canadian population. Residential schools were then brought into the presentation with a historical timeline from the 1700s to 1996. There were 18 residential schools in Ontario, and the last one being Fort Frances closed in 1974. Although the last one in Ontario closed in 1974, there were still residential schools open throughout Canada until 1996, which was when the last federally run residential school, the Gordon Residential School, closed in Saskatchewan. Trustee Garrow and Senator Thompson showed us how in residential schools, children were stripped of their identity and put in a uniform with a certain haircut to look a certain way and not show their culture. The impacts of residential schools were brought to us, along with the apologies that have been made and the Truth and Reconciliation, which was established in 2008. To finish the presentation, Trustee Garrow talked about colonialism and racism and the 6 steps of colonization with the 5 steps of decolonization. Overall, it was a presentation that was brought to Senate with a lot of information that we did not know and we needed to. I'd like to thank Senators Tanka Thompson and Isaac Cole for bringing this presentation to my attention, and Trustee Garrow for all the help he gave to the boys for their presentation and coming to Senate to present this. I was more than happy to have this presentation at Senate. Following lunch, we continued our mental health discussion from the previous meeting. We reviewed what we talked about at the previous meeting and what our next steps should include. I also talked about the Tell Them From Me sessions that were going on and to see if their school was participating and to see if they could get involved and potentially figure out what their school's action plan was regarding their school's results from the survey. I should also mention that we do plan to have a student senator group go to the Tell Them From Me survey sessions. Although we weren't able to prepare one for this Friday's, we plan to have one for the next one. We then had a discussion on what programs are already in place in their schools, which brought up how VCI has a new bunny at their school who helps students with anxiety as they go and see the bunny to relax and calm down. A few schools also mentioned how they have wellness weeks that go over really well with the students and think are very beneficial. Having school nurses were also mentioned to really help. We talked about having coping mechanisms and support through clubs, sports, teachers, and coaches, as well as emphasizing that staff are there to help you. We agreed that knowing how to get information needs to be improved and how an increase in advertising would be beneficial. We talked about how Link Crew is a good support for the grade 9 students for many reasons, but overall the support that students have at access to them is not well advertised, not well known, and it's felt as though they'd be looked at differently if they used the supports they do know of. I also showed the senators Mental Health Assist and how the website works and suggested for them to go look at it, as it has some very good resources. I also suggest to any of you who have not seen the website to go check it out, as it's a website that is a great resource and very beneficial. I then asked the students a variety of questions to see how they felt about some things in their schools. I asked them all to raise their hands as they answered yes to the question. I started with, do you feel supported in your school? Which almost all students raised their hand to, which I was very happy to see. Then continued with, do you feel that your school teaches you how to manage stress on any given day? Which most students raised their hand for, but after talking with the senators after the meeting and bringing up the question again, majority said that they did not fully understand the question and they did not feel that schools actually teach them how to manage their stress, but they have rather figured it out on their own. I then asked if they felt that they knew how to manage their stress, where I got very few hands raised, and then asked, do you feel as though you know how to cope and know coping mechanisms, where I got a decent amount of hands, and then a follow-up question of, does your school teach you coping mechanisms, which again I got very few hands, which had me questioning where these students then learned how to cope. One response being is a first responder course that one of my senators took, which is a great resource to use, but not everyone's able to take that first responder course. Many others said that it was a trial and error and as well as a learning as they go sort of process. I agreed that often in school it is a trial and error process with how you manage your stress, and is often a learning experience that you learn as you go through school. After our continuation of our mental health discussion, we broke off into houses and we had a discussion about our C4K Day video that we want to create. We talked about what we wanted to include in the video, how and where it was going to be shot, and what we wanted it to look like. We want a video that would appeal to the audience and connect with them, but also have it be informational so people are more aware of the cause and why we do all this. We are now in the process of creating an outline for the video, which we should hopefully have by exam time, and then start the process of creating the video shortly after that. Overall, it was a very successful day, and I think it was highly informational for the senators as well as myself. A lot was covered and a lot of information was given as well as gathered. I'm happy to say the communication outside of Senate meetings has stayed very regular, with hearing from my senators a few times a week, if not daily. And I think we have a lot of ideas and a lot of things planned that we're looking forward to getting done, and I'm just really excited to see everything that we accomplish.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Trustee Carter.
Just a comment about the videos that are coming out from the senators, the individual senators, and I think those are excellent ways of getting the news out as to what a student senator is. So congratulations on that, Grace.
Thank you. Yeah, the videos have come out again with new links. They were shown at the last report, but they're coming out again, but they're great.
Perfect.
I like them.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the report from OPSBA. Mr. McDonald.
I have nothing to report, Mr. Chair. It's been quiet, and I feel I've promoted OPSBA enough in the earlier motion.
We got the budget, but we got it passed. All right. Thank you. Okay, Director, do you have any comments?
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Chair and trustees, we're at that point where it's hard to believe that we're planning for the next school year, but we are, and you'll know that on our public website we have an invitation for the public to give staff feedback about the design of the 2017-2018 school year calendar. That calendar is very important to our schools, but they're also important to our families who we know they plan their lives around when our program is in session and in hiatus, and they're also very interested in knowing how they can plan after-school activities and things that are important to families beyond the school day. So we do hope that our communities will take advantage of offering us feedback, both if they wish to do that from a family-by-family basis or by school council basis. We welcome that input by, I believe, February 17th of next month. From there, Mr. Chair, staff will be bringing back a report before the late spring to advise the board about what that feedback revealed about what should be the best design for the calendar for the 2017-2018 school year. And speaking about calendars, we are certainly fully back at work after a lovely holiday, and we hope that our students and their families and our staff had a great break. Our academic staff are back at their learning in terms of math days that Superintendent Allen and her team are offering this week as we continue to use the great opportunity and the resources that we receive from the Ministry of Education to dig closely into how do we create math instruction that resonates with students such that they improve their learning and that they come to have a deeper appreciation and enjoyment for math. And for our students, particularly our secondary school students, we know that they're in the midst of their final summatives right now and trying to wrap up the first semester of study. We wish them luck as they try to wrap up the semester in a way that's successful for them and to show us what they've understood from their extensive learning over the past 4.5 months. And that all of our schools have been asked to post their examination schedules on either their Facebook and or their school website. And we encourage parents, if they have any questions, to take a look at that information, and if they can't locate it, to please contact their school. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. I just want to direct my comments specifically towards the visit to our board from the Minister of Education. I want to begin by thanking our superintendents, Superintendent Mills, Superintendent Dawes, the principals of the 4 schools, their staff, and most important, the students. They were gracious hosts. They represented Upper Canada extremely well. And I was very proud, as I would have been had the minister gone to any one of our schools in this board, because every school in our board would have done exactly the same thing in terms of making the minister feel welcome. Was very difficult, and let me be very honest. The visit was not prompted by us, was not initiated by our board, nor was the schools that were selected initiated by us. This all came out of the minister's office. The discussion started just prior to Christmas. Plans changed, and there was a lot of alterations, a lot of changes, and really wasn't finalized until the hours before the day. When the minister stopped by on the way through, the director and I, along with the minister and 3 people from her team, sat down very privately in the office, and I started the discussion, and I said that like any board in the province, we would be extremely proud to have the Minister of Education come and visit us. But I also felt comfortable enough, because this woman, I believe, is a woman of integrity. She proved that just watching her. I said that the timing was not good, and the fact that she would go to one area when we were having accommodation reviews across the board put me as a chair in a very difficult position and put trustees in a very difficult position. And she understood that. She gave her rationale. I am not going to tell you what her rationale is, because that means I'd be interpreting her voice, and that's not my job to do that. She understood very clearly that by coming down here and being in one particular area, that it did put us in a position where we had other areas of the board being concerned, or in some cases upset. I also took the opportunity at that point to talk about the accommodation review process, which came out, the guidelines came out in 2015, and I explained to her that even though it came out in 2015, there was a lot of misunderstanding about the guidelines, not only at the trustee level, but in the municipalities, and a lot of people did not clearly understand what this process was about, even though the policy came out in 2015. I talked about the top-up grant funding. I talked about the special education and the way funding is done there, and the deficit position it has put us in where we have to transfer money over. And I talked about the extreme challenges that a board such as us, who have a lot of rural communities, and the challenges that we have as a board to be able to provide the best learning experiences, the best equitable learning experiences for all of young people across our board. and that creates a challenge when we have small communities and we have small schools. So I took the opportunity in almost an hour discussion to be able to get out all of the key points that I know that the trustees have been concerned about. It was very important to me that in discussing all this that we maintain a positive relationship with the ministry. It's important that the ministry understands that we are part of the team. We are on the ministry. We are all part of the same goal. We work towards doing the very best we can for our young people and providing the best possible programming learning experiences for them. That's why we are here, and that's why we are in the position. We talked about the fact that we were looking down the road for 10, 15 years, and for that reason we needed to take a wide look. And she said that she certainly supported us and congratulated us on the fact that we would take that deeper look. She fully understands the situation we are in, and there are other boards that are very similar to ours that have rural communities. She understands our challenges, and she left here basically giving us a clear understanding that we had her support. The concern I have goes beyond that. I still understand it. I wasn't 5 kilometers out of Charlotte when I got a call from the newspapers from other areas wanting to know why one area over another. My concern was twofold. Number one, that other areas of the board would feel that we invited the minister and that we were favoring one ARC over another. We are not. My other deep concern that I have is that communities may have the impression that when a minister of education comes to your schools, you have a chance of not being closed. That is absolutely not the case. The Minister of Education cannot impact or influence the decision of a board of trustees. And when we talked about that, she understands very clearly that she would never do that because she can't do that. So the presence of a Minister of Education in your school is not a guarantee that it's going to influence or impact the Board of Trustees on how they make their decisions, nor will it influence or impact the staff in what they have to do in their work to create a final report. So I had an opportunity to say a lot of things that I know the trustees have talked to me about. But there's nothing nicer than a Minister of Education coming to our board. And I hope when this is over with and done and said, she comes back again. Because I know she respects the work that we are doing. I know she respects what she saw in the 4 schools she was in. I did repeat to her, as did the director, that any school in this board you could walk into and you would see exactly the same stuff. You would see the great work done by our principals, the great work being done by our teachers, and you would see amazing students. And that's what she saw yesterday, and that's where she would see in any one of our schools. So it was an uncomfortable visit, but at the same time, what I believe came out of it that is positive is we have a good relationship and a good rapport with the minister. She understands our challenges. She understands the complexity of our decisions, and she can now go back to Toronto and be able to say, I have been in rural Ontario, I've been in rural Eastern Ontario, and I have an idea of what it looks like. It would have been nicer had she got to all of Eastern Ontario and all of our schools. That being said, time would not allow her to do that, and I pray that she got back to Toronto safely. She went back in that storm. Anyways, I did pass on all of the information that I know that is concerning you, especially the trustees that did not have representation from the ministry in their areas. But I do repeat, in the very end, my final concluding words are, we did not, as a board, nor did our staff, pick the schools. That was done by the ministry. Okay. Okay, I need a motion to move into private, I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board move into Committee of the Whole, moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Bill McPherson. Just a show of hands. Thank you very much. That carries. A motion now that the Committee of the Whole move into private session, moved by Trustee McDonald, and Trustee Bill McPherson. Show of hands. Thank you very much, and we move into private.